This is Jyotika. Welcome to Excelling Psychology. In today's class, we'll be looking at how to solve Edexcel IAL Psychology past paper. This is the January 2024 paper that I'm discussing today. And this is the paper for the first unit, which is Social and Cognitive Psychology. In today's lesson, we will go through some answers for social psychology. Not only I will explain to you what is to be written, but how you have to think about the answers, how to write the answers, and what are some common mistakes that students make. Please keep in mind that this lesson is for students from the IAL specification, International A levels for Edexcel. This is not meant for students from GCE. As you know, GCE exams do not take place in January anyways. Okay, so let's begin with today's class. The first question which was asked in January was, in your studies of social psychology, you will have learned about Milgram's research into obedience. Describe the results of Milgram's ordinary man gives orders, that is experiment 13 study. So one of Milgram's variations has been asked for, and when it comes to the results word in the question, whenever they're asking about any results, data or findings, you must give figures, that is, you must give numbers. You must not give a conclusion or interpretation type of answer. You must give concrete findings which are there. Okay, so in this experiment 13, what we see is that when the authority figure was an ordinary person rather than a typical experimenter, in that case, only 25% of participants administered shocks up to 300 volts level, and only 20% administered them up to 450 volts. So what you have to note is that in this answer, we have written the exact percentage of participants, which is important for findings or results, and we have specified the voltage level also very clearly. Common mistake here is to give answers without numbers. So to just say, compared to the original study, in this variation, very few people obeyed the experimenter. That's not the way of writing. The other mistake students make is to give a conclusion type of answer, that when the experimenter does not look like a typical experimenter, then obedience drops or is not very much, something like that. So you don't have to give vague answers or interpretative answers. You have to give the answer just as you see on the screen. Also, it is possible that if you're learning from other sources, in some sources, instead of percentages, there might be actual raw figures, that is frequencies, such as 15 out of 20 participants refused to give the 300 volt shocks. That is perfectly acceptable. Means how you're giving the numbers in frequency format or percentage format, that is immaterial. Important thing is that you give the numbers. Okay, let's look at the next question. Explain one strength and one weakness of Milgram's ordinary man gives orders, that is experiment 13 study. So they're continuing with the same. For the strength and weakness type of answers, generally just be very complete in what you are saying, and most important, like I say, for the GCSE syllabus also, so if you're coming from there, that's very helpful. Link whatever point you're making with the study. In this case, whatever point you're making has to be connected with experiment 13. It should not be a general point about obedience studies or some general strength or limitation of Milgram's paradigm of experiments. It should be very specific to experiment 13, which is about the ordinary man. So one strength, if we see, is that the procedure was highly standardized in this experiment. Of course, once we give the point is it is standardized, we need to give evidence, so we need to explain why we are saying that. So to give examples of standardization, we see in this experiment, one, shock should be given in increasing intensity, that was instructed right at the onset also, as well as it was reminded to participants many times throughout the experiment. So this same procedure of first giving the instructions and then repeatedly emphasizing on how the shocks are to be given was done for each and every participant in experiment 13. So definitely this increased reliability of findings. This is the typical PEAL or PET structure or whatever you call it, but what you have to do is give the point, explain it, and then link it in the sense, show exactly which strength of the study increases because of the point made. One weakness is the ordinary man could have got derived authority from the experimenter. What we see in experiment 13 is that the ordinary man is not the one to give the instructions to participants right from the beginning and follow through the end. Actually, it's a proper experimenter who comes in the beginning, gives the initial instructions, and then pretends that he has to leave for some work, and that is when he hands over the charge to the ordinary man. So in this process, what participants might have interpreted is that he was having interested authority, or that he had legitimate power which he had derived from the experiment, because it was after all the experimenter who handed over the responsibility to him, and so they may have not perceived him as ordinary. So the assumption which we make of what is going on in participants' mind, or what their perception is, that they are assuming that he is an ordinary person, might not necessarily be the case. At least some of them might still be looking at him as an authority figure. So that begs the question, what if there were some of them who felt he was legitimate authority and that's why they gave the shocks, the ones who did continue till the end? So in that case, we can't say that the results are fully valid. So what decreases is the internal validity of the findings. Okay, so just see, not perceived him as ordinary, which could decrease internal validity. Okay, so again, just to reiterate, what we have to do in this answer is, we have to give a point, we have to explain that point. If we just say, like many students will make the mistake, the experimenter had derived authority and that reduced internal validity. That's very generic. We need to explain with context of the study what we mean by derived authority, exactly what happened in this experiment, and then definitely we can link saying that internal validity would reduce. It's also important to be clear of what type of weakness is induced by whatever feature we have named in the point. Okay, though I know every point is worth only 2 marks, but does not mean you take this answer casually. Like some students have a habit, only 8 markers, 12 and 16 markers they take seriously. Remaining questions they take it very lightly just because they are for 2 or 4 marks. One thing, these answers are very scoring, 2 and 4 marks. Yes, they are simple. That's why you should try to maximize your marks in them. Secondly, they might be only worth 2 or 4 marks, but taken together, how many 2 and 4 markers are there? It amounts to a lot of marks in the paper. So they are not to be taken lightly. Okay, the next question that is asked is, in your studies of conformity, you have learned about factors affecting conformity. Explain one reason why individual differences can affect conformity. Here the mistake students make is not to interpret the question only correctly. So when why individual differences can affect, they just go roundabout explaining something vague. Not every person shows a conformity. Different people can have different levels of conformity. In your syllabus, very clearly you have factors influencing conformity, within which you have individual factors and situational factors. So if you know your syllabus well, you would understand that when they say individual differences, they are referring to individual factors which influence conformity. So they don't want to know generally about conformity per se. They want you to specify some internal factor which is related to conformity and elaborate on that. Again, if you've done your GCSE, this is somewhat repetitive last year also. That is, if you've done 9-1 Edexcel GCSE Psychology, you would realize that the same topic is there in the syllabus even for that one. So you should be knowing this answer right from there. The most important factor when it comes to conformity is locus of control. There are other factors also like self-esteem, but generally we discuss locus of control. Now another mistake would be just to leave it at that. So to just say different people have different loci of control, and that's why some of them would obey and some would not. Some would conform and others would not. That's not the way of putting it. We have to be very specific and say where we are expecting more conformity, or why one type of locus of control will result in more conformity. So specific elaboration is needed. Those who have external locus of control are more likely to obey. Why? Because they feel that they are being controlled by other people. Here we can also bring about the other locus of control, which is internal, and say that they are less likely to conform. Okay, firstly, this is a mistake. They should be conform, not obey. So we can bring about the internal locus of control and say they are less likely to conform because they believe that they control their own decisions. But the way I have gone about it is just to give an example of external locus of control, because in my answer it is implied that if external locus of control is making people conform more, then internal locus will make them conform less. So I thought it better to give an example of external locus of control itself. If you want, you can contrast this with internal locus of control. The idea is that your writing style could be different. Everyone has a different way of explaining things. But what is important is to be very specific that the internal factor causing individual differences is locus of control. That should be explicitly mentioned, and it should be further elaborated upon in some way to show reasoning. So for external locus of control, I have given the example. People with external locus of control might color their hair in the same way as their friends because they feel how they should appear, or their appearance should be determined by their friend group. Okay, in the paper you will see for IAL they emphasize a lot on chains of reasoning throughout marking criteria. So this is how reasoning is shown, literally that you know the reason or you know why something is occurring. So make sure you convey that to the examiner. Don't give descriptive points. Many students manage to convert AO3 also into AO1 by just stating internal locus of control influences conformity, and external locus of control, like they just name it and then they would say so that is what causes individual differences. Where is the reasoning in that? Why does locus of control influence conformity, or how does it influence? The why and how is not answered. That means there is no chain of reasoning. It's just statements which are made, which does not help you to score in AO3. At the most it can help you in AO1. Next is explain 2 reasons why culture can affect conformity. So again, within the syllabus we learn about different aspects of culture and how they influence conformity. So the first one I've taken is individualism and collectivism. I will post the answers on my website and I'll link it below in the description box and in the pinned comment. As I always say in every video, either along with this video, just keep on looking at the answers. You can pause, look at the answer, then listen to what I'm saying, or before or after this video you can go through the answers. For the little longer answers, 4 marks, 8 marks, 12 marks, it becomes difficult for me to narrate the whole answer in the video. It's very time consuming. So I just highlight what is to be done, what mistakes are made, but reading of the answer you can do on your own. I don't want to read out the entire answer. Okay, so now what you can see is individualism and collectivism I've taken as the first cultural dimension, which influences conformity. So again you can see I always follow the same format, which is desirable: point, explanation, elaboration, link, peel. Because if I just go about, like if I just begin with the example, in Japan there is a concept of wa, which means harmony, which is emphasized upon, but I don't name individualism and collectivism. It's very difficult for the examiner to read. Like first they have to read the example and they have to interpret from that which dimension I'm speaking about. So the best approach is to name the dimension outright and then say, okay, this is an example of a collectivist culture, Japan, in which there is the harmony concept of war. And that is why, again, very important to say how it influences conformity. It will increase conformity. But in individualistic cultures, what will happen? Conformity will decrease because of concepts like entrepreneurial spirit, in which people are expected to be authoritative, individual-minded, independent, have a unique personality, give their creative inputs to their work, their business, things like that. And this decreases conformity. So the mistake students make here is to say that in Japan, say, there is harmony, and in the West there is entrepreneurial spirit. How it links to conformity is not made clear. Does it increase, does it decrease conformity? That we don't get to see in the answer. And again, there's no explicit mention of which cultural dimension they're talking about through these examples. So avoid being unclear or ambiguous in any way in your answer. Make sure you always are very direct in whatever you are answering. Be as to the point as possible. Okay, another example of culture, like we have learned in the syllabus when it comes to conformity, has to do with enforcement of certain values. That is, more specifically speaking, norms. Because this is in the concept of conformity, context of conformity. So we know conformity is done to norms or unsaid rules. So in some cultures, there is a direct expectation that people should follow norms. And here I have taken the example of India, where children are instructed to obey their elders and show them respect in various ways, such as by touching their feet, or by never speaking in between, that is, never interrupting them or never answering them back. Any such examples can be given to illustrate how children, while being socialized in this culture, are directly instructed to follow the norms. So that is what results in conformity. Okay, let's come to the next question. First, they have given a scenario. I'll just read it out quickly. Archie has started walking his dog in his local village, and there a police officer stops him, tells him to go back to his home, close his windows and be inside because there is some chemical gas leak. And Archie immediately stops walking the dog. He rushes home. He sees that all the windows are closed, and he does not leave his house till the police sends a message that all the residents are now allowed to go outside again. What we have to explain is why Archie is obedient and why is he following the instructions of the police officer. It's very obvious that this is an AO2 question. It is application based. So the most important thing, as you would expect, is you have to contextualize your answer. Again, for students who have done GCSE, this is nothing new. But if this is the first time you are looking at such questions, so just be aware that contextualization is key. If they just wanted you to descriptively state when people obey, they would have just asked you a direct question. Why they have bothered to give a scenario at length is because they want you to refer to that scenario while answering. As obvious as it may seem, this is what is lacking in most of the answers. Okay, so also this is for 4 marks. Whenever you're confused how many points you should give, because sometimes they don't tell you, give 2 reasons why he conformed, or why he obeyed. They're not telling you that. You might wonder, do I need to give more than 1 reason? You don't. That's why they haven't specified. You can choose here, you want breadth or depth. Depth has to be there, but you want 1 point and you get into too much depth with that, or you want more than 1 point and go into some depth with each. That is up to you. I would suggest, because you can see from the 2 and 4 markers what the trend is. If this was to be asked in terms of them explicitly telling you how many reasons to give, definitely they would have asked for 2, because it's a 4 marker. From the question so far, you must have understood that typically 1 reason comes for 2 marks. So if there are 2 reasons being asked for, it would be 4 marks. And the same applies to strengths and weaknesses. 1 strength is always worth 2 marks. So if they're asking you give strengths and they're not specifying how many, but they're allotting 4 marks to the answer, somewhere they do expect around 2 strengths. But like I said, why they're not specifying, if you want you could just take up one and elaborate more on that. As of now, I have given 2 reasons why 𝗬𝗓 might be obeying, and of course I have elaborated, because without depth we are not getting marks. But after this answer, I will explain to you how you could take only 1 point also and just cover that for 4 marks. So the first reason I've given is that the police officer is perceived to be legitimate authority by 𝗬𝗓 because of the signs of authority. Definitely the police officer must be wearing a uniform. He must be carrying some gun or I forgot that rod which they carry, or he must be wearing badges. So all that must have been a very direct reminder to 𝗬𝗓 that he's an authority figure, and then taking him to be legitimate authority, 𝗬𝗓 must have decided that he must follow him and go home. He must follow his instructions. Another reason I have given is proximity. Between 𝗬𝗓 and the police officer, there was no physical distance. As we see in this scenario, the police officer directly approaches 𝗬𝗓, and that's face to face, so it's not even over the telephone or not through any social media message. The officer directly confronts him and asks him to go home. So that is one more reason why 𝗬𝗓 must have obeyed, because of lack of distance. Now again, here in any answer, what you have to see is, like I said, they emphasize a lot on chains of reasoning, or reasoning, how one point should emerge from the other. Just because it's a scenario based or an application based answer does not mean that you don't show reasoning. Don't take it for granted. So what you have to do is, even in these type of answers, as you're referring to the scenario, you have to keep on giving reasoning. So for example, okay, the police officer must be wearing a uniform. So what? How does this influence 𝗬𝗓? Keep on asking the question, so what, throughout. So that will help you to show reasoning. So okay, I've written that he's wearing uniform. I've written that he's facing 𝗬𝗓 face to face. So what? I have to show the reasoning. So that is what is done throughout the answer. Like I said, you could read the answer by yourself. That will be helpful. Now what if you wanted to take only 1 point and elaborate more? That approach is also acceptable. Only don't stray too much from the context. That's why I don't take it usually. So you can talk about wearing a uniform, and then you could further elaborate on signs of authority. So you could give an example maybe from Milgram in his study, how the experimenter always wore a white coat, which reminded participants he was authority figure. Or in general, how signs of authority serve to create obedience. So you could talk more about how they serve as reminders and don't let the person forget that there is an authority figure in front of him. And even if he thinks otherwise, even if he thinks of dissenting, it is the reminder that is in front of him that does not allow him to dissent. So you could give such points, but keep referring to 𝗬𝗓 and the police officer as you give this. So keep saying in terms of, okay, 𝗬𝗓 must have thought that he must listen to the police officer. So for example, even if he wanted to dissent and he thought it was inconvenient to go back to his home, that now that he was outside with his dog, the uniform of the policeman must have served to remind him that he shouldn't dissent. There's an authority figure in front of him, and even if it causes inconvenience, he must return home. So keep explaining your point. No doubt for 4 marks you're explaining further, but with reference to 𝗬𝗓. Okay, also many students would ask, if it's 4 marks, you have to give 4 points. There's no hard and fast rule again how many words you should write, how much space you should cover, or how many points you should give. Actually, it should be as much as is required to answer correctly. But still, I do feel that as a rough rule of thumb, just to remain on the right track, you could think of giving 4 points for 4 marks. That is helpful. At the very least, even if you're not aiming to count how many points, please don't give 2 points and 2 sentences and half-baked answers with no detailing or no reasoning. That's the worst type of answers we get to see. Such a long scenario is there, so much space is there, 4 marks are there, means every indication is there that the student should explain at length, and still the student just gives 1-2 lines answers. That's very disappointing. So some students would just say, police officer is authority figure, so Archie is obeying. Police officer has legitimate authority, so Archie is obeying. Do you really think that could get you 4 marks? Okay, so be wise when you're writing the answer. Make sure you're showing your good understanding. Don't just write for the sake of answering, or don't just superficially learn the rules. Oh, if it's AO2, I have to use wording from the question, so just let me use the word Archie, and that makes the answer very good. That is not how it works. Okay, the next question, now we typically come to the data analysis type of questions, which are very popular in Edexcel GCSE as well as IAL. So quickly to read the scenario, Silas was investigating majority influence and used a questionnaire with close-ended questions to gather data about group behavior. She totaled the scores for each respondent to see how they were to conform, how likely they were to conform, and to the majority. Score of 0 indicated they were very less likely to conform, and 10 indicated that they were very likely to conform. So basically she's done some study and scored participants on their conformity. On the table we can see her results. We can see the respondent numbers in one column and the score for conformity in the other column, which is out of 10. What they want us to do is calculate the ratio of respondents scoring less than 5 to those scoring over 5. Okay, the thing is, if again you've done GCSE, this should be very easy for you. It's exactly the same type of question which used to come last year. If you're doing it for the first time, these are basic mathematical skills, as you know. So what you have to know is, for these type of answers, the space which is given on the left. Now in IAL they are more explicit than in GCSE. They do mention its space for calculation, and this space is for your final answer. So what you have to be very careful about is, any intermediary step that you are using to come to the final ratio should not be placed over here. No intermediary steps. Okay, so here don't show that, oh, I'm doing 6:4 and then this is 3:2. Don't do all these things over here. This is strictly meant for the very final answer that you want to give, and all the steps that you want to do, they have to come here. More or less, this is not marked what you do for calculation. It's literally a space. The examiner is interested in the final answer. Still, for 2 reasons, you should be explicit and elaborate in your steps for calculation. One, it shows the examiner you know how to calculate and you're just not copying from someone else. So be as explicit as possible. Show that you know how to do every step. Secondly, there are so many instances, I can't tell you, of students who are in too much overconfidence when it comes to these answers. That, oh, they're so easy, they're baby level answers, and then they don't write here properly. In fact, some of them won't do any calculations at all. They just take the calculator and press some numbers on that, and then for very, very silly reasons they lose marks for simple oversights which would have not happened had they bothered to write. So it's always like they say, better safe than sorry. So though it takes, I don't know how many seconds or 1 or 2 minutes to do some calculations here, it is worth spending the time than writing a wrong answer in the final out of overconfidence, later realizing and regretting that, oh, how could I make that careless mistake. Don't take any answer lightly on the paper. It's an exam, it's to be taken seriously. The syllabus has been made by highly qualified experts, and there is some reason why they are giving you simple maths problems. So don't underestimate anything, and don't have the attitude of trivializing anything in life. It's not helpful. Okay, so here you can see what are the steps required to calculate ratio. They want ratio of responding scoring less than 5 and those scoring over 5. So first we need to count on this table. Literally, how many have got less than 5? So we see 1, 2, 3, 4, They have got less than 5. Then how many have got more than 5? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this is only what I have shown in the steps. How many have got less than 5? How many have got more than 5? Then I have taken the ratio in the raw form first, of course, and then from there, using the least common multiple, we come down to the lowest form or the simplest form of the ratio, which is 3:2. I have written it here, that common factor 2 is taken to reduce. And then here you can see only the final answer I've given. I've been careful about that. So none of the steps come in the final dash which is to be filled. The next question is to calculate the mean score for all the respondents. So this comes more towards statistics than basic maths, but the principles are similar. And we have to give the answer to 1 decimal place. For the mean, you have to calculate the sum and divide it by the number of scores which are there. So that's what I've done. I've shown how I have taken the total scores. Again, it's not many students feel lazy. Who will write this whole thing, 6 plus 7 plus 3? What are you going to achieve by saving 5 or 10 seconds? Okay, so this I have written 1 I have added and shown to show how I have taken the sum. Then of course I have just counted. Counts are not necessary to show, but just for your own accuracy you can count mentally this way. So 10 students are there. Also in my videos, because I am demonstrating to you how calculations are to be done, many times I make lots of markings on the paper. In your exam hall, do not make any markings on the paper. Okay, now the mean is 46 upon 10. So I have shown also, I have not written the formula explicitly. Some students like to write, you can write. That is also good. So you could write sum of x upon n. Like I said, that is not compulsory. So even without that, you could just indicate what's on the numerator and what's on the denominator. My intention when I'm writing the steps is to show the examiner exactly how I have got the answer. So I don't get into formulas, I directly give numbers. But as I said, everyone has their own style of writing. Just make sure somehow you're conveying that you know how to give the answer. Now this particular answer, if you just divide 46 by 10, you directly get 4.6. They've said give to 1 decimal place. It is coming to 1 decimal place. So that is how you write exactly. But in case, if it was not directly coming to 1 decimal place, you would have to use the rules of rounding. And you would have to bring it down to 4.6. Again, rounding, how it is to be done, standard mathematical principles you've revised in GCSE in psychology, or otherwise here also in all the textbooks they've covered rounding again. So just follow those principles. If we have to round to 1 decimal place, the number on the 2nd decimal place, if it is 5 or more, we increase the 1st decimal place by 1. And if it is less than 5, we maintain the 1st decimal place as it is. So in this case it's 4.60 technically speaking, which is less than 5. So we retain 6 as it is. Okay, so these were some tips on how to answer the calculation question. Let's quickly look at the last answer. Assess how well research into conformity has developed our understanding of social influences on human behavior. One thing is, as soon as you see the question for an essay, 8, 12 or 16 marks, immediately become mindful of the distribution of marks. So in an 8 marker, AO1 counts for 4 marks, AO3 counts for 4 marks, same as your GCSE distribution was there of marks, same way. So for AO1 you have to give description. Very explicitly it's mentioned research into conformity. There are many possible studies you could discuss, but I like to go by what is in the syllabus. IAL syllabus is much more flexible than GCSE. So you can take different sample studies also, which are mentioned in passing in the syllabus or which are not even mentioned in the syllabus. But in some textbook it's given as an illustration, you could take those. But explicitly the ones in the syllabus are Ash's study and variations. So that's the one I have chosen to describe for AO1. My answer, this one is just short of 460 words. I think it comes to something like 450 words in total. Like I said, we don't have to bother about length and things, but just to give you a rough idea, usually it's expected 12 markers can be around 500 to 600 words. So this one can be around, like, say 300 to 400 words. So definitely my answer has exceeded that limit. You can write more briefly. Whenever I write answers for my videos, I do tend to make them a little longer because I like to show some diversity of points. But also that is important that you shouldn't go on the other extreme. Like, if my answer is overworded because I need to explain to you, it shouldn't be you assume that you can write very less compared to what I'm showing you. So don't become drastic in the other way that you feel you can just write 2 lines for each. It's not as simple as that. 8 markers carrying a lot of weightage. You have to be elaborate on how you're explaining. Also, many students just memorize the mark scheme and write that. So they go through a lot of past paper mark schemes. One thing is there are too many permutations and combinations of questions that's possible on the paper. So you'll never see an exact repetition of a past question. So if your strategy is to memorize mark schemes, you will be disappointed. Because no matter what you've memorized, it might be close to what is asked in the new paper, but it won't be exactly the same. So you won't get perfect marks. Secondly, very carefully you have to see in the mark scheme its indicative content and its pointers for what could be written. Across all boards, in the mark scheme, what is given are pointers. They are not complete answers that are given in the mark schemes. So mark schemes are different and answer writing is different. So mark scheme, you should go through them. I'm not saying you shouldn't. Of course you should go through them. They're very insightful. Also, points which are not there in the textbook, sometimes you get those from the mark scheme, so very helpful for learning also. But they should not be taken to be ready-made answers. A mark scheme is a mark scheme. It's not a solution sheet. Okay, so what you have to do is, for AO1, in this answer, you have to talk about Asz's experiments. I'm not reading, like I told you, the whole answer, but I have given it in the standard aim, procedure, results and conclusion format. All of us know Asz's experiments. I don't need to explain anything about it. And then I have spoken a little about variation studies as well. There are 3 variations, so it is definitely impossible to cover all for 4 marks of AO1. So I have just given one example. I mentioned there are many variations. What is the purpose in finding the same answer in each? The paradigm is the same in each. But to illustrate, I've given only one example, which is of unanimity of majority. Okay, so that is how I've covered AO1. If you want, you can cover, like, to condense this section, you can cover only Asz's original experiment. But for illustration purposes, various ways in which you can answer, I have also discussed variation. Now coming to AO3, evaluation. Evaluation means strengths and weaknesses. For balance, I like to give 2 strengths and 2 weaknesses. It is not compulsory to give an equal number of strengths and weaknesses. First, keep that in mind. Secondly, what is most important when it comes to AO3 is to answer the question with the help of whatever AO3 points you're giving. So here they've asked how well research has developed our understanding. It's like they're asking you, okay, whatever research has been done in the area, but have we understood conformity well because of that research? Has the research been sufficient? Has it been good enough to explain to us how conformity plays a role in behavior? That is what they are asking us over here. So my points are meant to answer this question. It's not that, okay, I memorize some strengths and weaknesses of Asz's study and the variations, let me just write that. That is not the intent with which I write. The intent is to answer the question which is asked, and accordingly I have chosen the strengths and weaknesses. This is the best approach. Right now I don't have that much time, so I'm not showing the full table and the criteria according to which they score, but reasoning, organized thoughts are very important criteria for scoring in this answer. So reasoning will be only according to the question. It cannot be random. So let me just list out 2 strengths and weaknesses. It can't be that way. So to answer this question, the strengths I have taken are, again I'm not reading everything, cause-effect relationship being established, and the procedure being very reliable. So I've taken that internal validity and standardization as strengths to demonstrate that there is credibility. Like when they are asking how much it has developed our understanding, it has developed our understanding very accurately, very credibly, that yes, conformity does influence how people take decisions, that is their behavior of decision making, what to do. But then I have also shown the other side through the weaknesses, that no doubt our understanding is good, but it is limited because real tasks, how they work out in conformity, we are not able to see, because these are just laboratory experiments. So in the weaknesses, I have taken the points related to ecological validity, that Ash's experiments have been very weak. When it comes to realism, mundane realism is lacking, and also they have been unrepresentative of large sections of the population. Like there are only male participants in these studies, no female participants. Why I have taken these points? Because it goes to show that yes, our understanding is good, but it might not be applicable to real world scenarios or to a vast section of the population. So to the extent that we need to actually use these findings in everyday life, we are not clear on how social influence affects behavior in real life, and that is why the credibility of research is there, but understanding is not complete. That is the point I have put across through this essay. So whatever I have said, you understand better if you read the answers. So make sure you read the answer and see how it is structured. There is again no hard and fast rule of how many strengths and weaknesses you have to give here. At a minimum, I would say 1 strength and 1 weakness. You could give 3 evaluation points in total. You could give 4 like I have given. Try not to exceed 4, because what happens is then depth is sacrificed for breadth. So if you give more than 4, in that case you'll end up writing a lot of points without explaining any in sufficient length. So don't do that. And if you're writing only 2 points, make sure they elaborate enough to justify why you've covered only 2 points. Also, like I said, it's not compulsory to give equal number of strengths and weaknesses, but also it is expected that you give a balanced answer. It is also not acceptable to give an imbalanced answer. Like this question is asking you how much we've understood social influence on human behavior, and if your answer makes it out as if they are only strengths, it is very credible, so we've fully understood social influence. That's not true. So don't give only strengths. By the same token, if you give only weaknesses, it looks like we've not understood anything at all about social influence on human behavior. That is also not true. So give both the sides, give a balance. Does not have to be equal number of strengths and weaknesses, but show both the sides to show your reasoning in the sense of a balanced perspective, and that you know to see the argument side and the counter argument side for every topic. Be sure to highlight that. Other problems in this answer, usually what students do is imbalance between AO1 and AO3. Most students are more tilted towards writing AO1 because they memorize the textbook content a lot. So AO1 is something you can directly answer without having to reason. So they feel they can compensate in some way by writing more of AO1 if they are writing less of AO3. That doesn't work. The marks have been reserved. AO1 is 4 marks, AO3 is 4 marks. So using that approach is not going to help in any way. If you write too much of AO1, unnecessary points will be disregarded by the examiner. So whether you write this half the answer as AO1 or whether you take it till the very end, you just keep on writing AO1, maximum you're getting is 4 marks. So the rest of it is going to be a waste of your time. Second common mistake is again what is seen throughout the paper, generic points, not relating them to what is given in AO1. Like if you read this answer, you will see wherever I have given points, I have connected them with Ash's experiment. So cause effect, what was the cause in Ash's experiment, what was the effect, what was standardized in Ash's experiment and the variations, what is not realistic about Ash's task. I've given examples also in real life how we see conformity, where we see it which is not seen in his experiments, contextualizing and making points relevant. So again, the standard mistake of just going on naming points, not showing any contextualization, not making points specific, all indicating towards lack of answer writing practice, lack of exam focus, no understanding of how exam questions are to be answered, and solely relying on memorizing content of the textbook. That brings about this weakness of not being able to answer AO3 part well. So make sure you do a lot of answer writing practice, you get your answers corrected, you get feedback on them, then only you will be able to do well on the paper. Otherwise, especially on the 8, 12 and 16 markers, your weaknesses of just knowing the content and not knowing answer writing will be shown very prominently to the examiner. Okay, so this is how we answer the 8 marker. These are the tips I had to share. Rest you can read the answers on the website. So that's all I have for this lesson. I'll be ending today. I'll meet you soon with another video. Thank you for watching.